You tuned into the Voxit show along with Ogi Williams, current representative of YPIA, and we'll be talking about the BRICS Summit. And now, Ogi, I know this is the 8th year since formation, and being the 5th summit, let's start off by what is the BRICS Summit?
Basically what the BRICS Summit is a formation between the 5 biggest emerging economies on the planet. Out of that grouping come Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa has been added to the group in 2010 as an official member. And basically what the group strives to achieve is promoting a different kind of economic development for the developing world that stands outside the Western norm of the International Monetary Fund as well as the World Bank, and it provides an alternative funding method for countries experiencing infrastructural adjustment and development in the 21st century.
Tell me, when will the BRICS Summit partake?
The BRICS Summit is taking place this week, last week of March, and it's hopeful that a number of things will be achieved at this year's summit, including the development of a reserve bank as well as a business council. South Africa is very hopeful to be the head of this reserve bank. It stands a lot to gain, and there's a lot of opportunities to be laid out. All BRIC countries can participate in and take good advantage of, but at the same time it also paves the way for good relations between the member states.
Information regarding the summit, how can we get more information on the summit that is happening at the moment? Is there any website that we can go to?
Well, there's the brics5.co.za website, which is the official website for the summit. It provides background information on all the major actors, including ourselves. So that's at brics5.co.za. At the same time, you can also find information on our own page at ypia.org.za, as we will be publishing articles with relation to the BRICS Summit with some good critiques. And we've also had a good guest lecture which has happened this week, given by Peter Draper, a political economist, and he gave us a really good overview of the BRICS Summit and what is to be expected. And after the guest lecture given by Peter Draper, I managed to ask him a few questions with regards to South Africa's role in BRICS, and this is what he had to say.
Thank you for coming to Monash, South Africa, and giving a wonderful lecture. I just wanted to get your opinion on what would be the benefits of South Africa hosting this BRICS-led or a BRICS development bank on the African continent.
Well, if it's a BRICS-led development bank, it positions South Africa, in theory at least, as that gateway to Africa. So a bank based in South Africa sourcing finance from the other BRICS members, but investing in African projects, so drawing on South African expertise, knowledge, etc., but for broader African development.
Okay. And at the same time, what possible role could South Africa play, considering it's the newest member of the BRICS formation, both for Africa and for global influence?
Sure, tough question. Look, I think South Africa brings a uniquely African perspective. It's not the only African perspective, clearly, but in some senses, even though officially it doesn't want to represent Africa, it certainly flies an African flag. And I think that's important. So that matters in organizations like the G20, the BRICS as a caucus group within the G20. Then also this African agenda that South Africa is bringing to bear at this particular BRICS Summit matters, I think, as well, in the sense that it's bringing a sharper focus to discussions around regional integration and how the BRICS member states can contribute to those processes in Africa.
Okay, thank you. And one last question. Considering that South Africa is the weakest economy out of the BRICS 5, what possible influence could the rest have upon South Africa in terms of both this BRICS-led or a BRICS development bank, and as well as in terms of trade and investment?
Trade and investment, dealing with that first. As I said, I don't think that there's going to be a treaty focus to the intra-BRICS discussion. It's really going to be about facilitating trade and South Africa's role within that. And as you say, it's a relatively marginal player compared to the others. Yeah, it's difficult to say. I mean, I think that the way South African authorities see it is that the BRICS is another arrow in the quiver, so to speak, when it comes to trade and investment diversification. So we have existing and strong trade and investment ties with Europe, with the US, with Japan. BRICS represents diversification from that, and that's good and healthy. Doesn't mean that they therefore have more political influence over us, if that's the question that you're asking.
Yes.
I mean, I think that evolves naturally anyway, and it evolves primarily bilaterally.
Yes.
So China, our trade ties are strongest with them, therefore they have more influence with us. That has very little to do with the BRICS as a grouping. It's a bilateral phenomenon.
Thank you so much for your time, Peter.
Now this year, the BRICS Summit will be focusing on the development of the Reserve Bank, as you mentioned, and also a joint economic cooperation standpoint of the summit itself. Interesting fact that I read here is that South Africa, being the smallest group, we have the most gain from this summit. Tell me a bit more about that, Ogi.
Okay, well, currently South Africa is the newest member of the BRIC group. As I said, it joined in 2010. Although it currently accounts for only 2.5% of trade, it's also responsible for 11% of trade between countries, BRIC countries and Africa. So on that instance, the majority or a certain portion of trade between the BRIC countries and Africa comes just exclusively to South Africa. However, it's also one of the weakest economies in terms of comparison between the others in the BRICS Summit. So it currently sits at 29th on the global ranking, but it is the headquarters of Africa's largest stock exchange, and the South African banks lead the continent in terms of financial power. So there's a lot of incentive in dealing with South Africa as a power in Africa.
So that would actually be the gateway to work with other countries within Africa, and South Africa being like one of the gateways of the BRICS Summit to improve Africa as a continent?
Indeed, it can serve as a gateway. There's, certain things attached to that term. However, considering that the BRICS countries have a lot to invest in amongst themselves, Africa has to have a partner in that summit. So South Africa being the strongest economy on the continent, it can provide a lot of incentive for Brazil and India, China, as well as Russia to deal politically and economically with South Africa.
Now moving on to Brazil, we're looking at marginal growth between 2004 and 2008. And Brazil alone has noted a substantial dip in terms of investment on the Bovespa. Now, for those of you who don't know, Ogi, what is Bovespa?
Okay, the Bovespa is basically the Brazilian stock exchange. And this year it hasn't exactly performed very well. It's noted a 4% dip. And it basically highlights how investment has substantially lessened over the course of the year, as well as from last year. So the development of a bank such as the one that's currently on the agenda would be a substantial benefit to Brazil, not just in terms of it receiving investment from the other members, but having the potential to further develop infrastructure. Over the past decade, Brazil has actually performed very well in terms of global standards. It has increased its middle class by 40 million people. Considering Brazil is a country of 200 million, that's basically raising a quarter of its population into the middle class. And over the course of the next decade, it's also expected to invest nearly $1 trillion towards energy and infrastructure development. So indeed, while its stock exchange is not performing very well, it stands to gain a lot from investments, especially from the countries in the BRICS cooperation organization.
Moving on to Russia, where are we standing with regards to the commodity reserves? I know Putin, the current BRICS president of Russia, is aiming to focus on economic growth and improvement to evolve the quality of life for its citizens. What is the plan?
Well, Russia basically has an incentive to cooperate with BRICS on a number of levels. After all, it is very endowed in resources such as natural gas and oil, but that leaves it very vulnerable to market fluctuations. So, for instance, if there's a recession in Europe or in the United States or any other country with which Russia deals with exclusively to sell its resources to, if those countries are not purchasing those resources, Russia stands to lose a lot. However, if it expands its development to other sectors and not just resource export, for instance, if it exports more manufactured products to all member states within the BRICS cooperation organization, it will have certain amounts of leverage should a market crisis ensue in terms of the drop in price of oil or the drop in price of natural gas. After all, Russia, like any other states within the BRICS cooperation organization, is looking after its own interests. However, it is also looking for political leverage as well as economic opportunity to develop its own state.
Now, the 10th largest economy being India, what will we be expecting from India for the years to come with regards to this BRICS summit?
Okay, well, India is also a substantial player in terms of BRICS. While its economy is currently the 10th largest, it's just behind Russia, but it has substantial room for growth, especially over the next 2 decades. Just 2 years ago, in 2011, GDP registered a 6.5% growth, which is substantial considering that China sits between 10% or has been at 10% for the past 30 years, and only recently it has dipped to between 7 and 7.5%. So India with 6.5% growth is still substantial in terms of BRICS. At the same time, its foreign reserves have increased between the period of 91 to 2003. Foreign reserves have gone from 1 billion to 110 billion. So in 12 years, it's increased by over 100%. So in the 10 years following 2013, the reserves are likely to be close to 500 billion, if not more.
With China being the second last of discussion, what gain will China have and how will they benefit from this summit, Ogi?
China is basically the strongest out of the BRIC countries. As I say, it's registered remarkable growth, over 10% every year for the past 30 years. So it definitely stands to gain the most. Its foreign reserves, for instance, have increased from 10 trillion renminbi, which is the Chinese currency, to over 40 trillion, which is roughly $6.3 trillion in foreign reserves. And foreign trade has gone from 500 billion to over 3 trillion. So these are substantial numbers. It's not something to be sneered upon, especially in terms of Western powers. They need to understand that China is now become a substantial player in the global economy. And while its political system of governance is still that of communism, it is shifting slowly but surely towards a state-driven capitalist method of governing. Therefore, over the next 10 years, it's only likely to increase its economic growth rate as well as its foreign exchange reserves. It currently accounts for 40% of global consumption in terms of zinc, lead, copper, and nickel, with importing of 50% of oil as well as a substantial portion of natural gas. It is a very oil-intensive economy, and currently it's busy looking to acquire as much of the resource as it can from all sectors of the world. And doing that will require substantial development in bilateral relations between China and other countries.
I know President Jacob Zuma seems to be very optimistic with regards to the role the group can play regarding South Africa and youth development, unemployment, and those being major concerns in South Africa at the moment. What will we see from South Africa and its future plans for this summit?
Okay, well, as I said, South Africa is the smallest out of the BRIC economies. However, it does stand to gain substantially from being a partner of BRICS. As you mentioned, President Zuma has quite an optimistic outlook with regards to BRICS and what the summit holds for South Africa. After all, South Africa has a very large proportion of unemployment, especially in the youth sector, with over 40% youth unemployed. And the construction of the BRICS Development Bank, as I mentioned, will hold great potential for development of South African infrastructure. If each country within BRICS commits an average of $10 billion US, which will amount to $50 billion US together, and they're all invested into a reserve bank, which is based in South Africa. South Africa has a lot to gain. It can use that for investing in infrastructural development. It can use that to invest in education, into greater construction, and in general the upliftment of infrastructure in the country. And considering we are the strongest economy in Africa, that will prove beneficial not just to us, but to also our neighbors in the SADC. So Mozambique and Angola, Botswana and Namibia also stand to profit substantially should our economy increase and should our investment potential also boost along with that, considering the reserves which BRICS Reserve Bank would bring to South Africa.
Ogi, thank you so much for joining us in studio here at the Voxit Show, current representative of YPIA, and we have been talking about the BRICS Summit with regards to international relations here at Mo Radio. Thank you so much for your time, Ogi.
Thank you, Peter.